Sold for a whopping $39,000. Have a lot of money. I do not. Quiet luxury variegated plant. Fellow plant weirdos, it's your girl Carmia Marceline. If you are new to the channel, hey, welcome to the family. We unabashedly hyperfixate on plants here, particularly expensive ones. I actually did a part 1 of my quiet luxury plant series a few months ago, and if you haven't watched that, I'm gonna link that up there for you to peruse. And in today's video, I am doing the second part, where I am also talking about sophisticated, timeless, luxurious houseplants, but these are variegated. So get ready, because I am going to discuss their origin, history, their market value, and of course their plant care if you are lucky enough to have these in your collection. I have none of these in my collection. So let's get into it. Quiet luxury plant number 1. A Philodendron Ilsemanii has these thick, elongated leaf blades with a dark green hue. It also has different variegation depending on the leaf. It's not like a one-size-fits-all situation. And the variegation has splotches and splashes of white and even some green freckles. Ilsemanii are native to a specific part of Ecuador. It only grows in rainforests that have an elevation of 4,500 feet. As a result, there's very little supply because there aren't that many seeds or even parts of the plant that can be propagated and mass produced. Hence, the really high price. You can find a plant with 4 to 5 large leaves with a pretty decent amount of variegation for about $1,100 on Etsy's marketplace. I also saw a couple of options on my local Facebook group. These were smaller, more juvenile plants, but they were about $400. But if you do want something with more intense, something with higher variegation, be ready to shell up to several thousands of dollars. If you have one of these in your collection, it has very similar care instructions to other variegated philodendrons. That means having soil that is extremely well draining, orchid bark, perlite. You get the gist. You also want to water it thoroughly after the soil is completely dry. You want it to have humidity between 50 to 80%, and then you also want to give it plenty of bright indirect sunlight. Quiet luxury plant number 2, a variegated Philodendron Gloriosum. Still has similar heart-shaped leaves, the beautiful soft texture, the striking green veining, but the difference is that it has splotches of cream and even a light green. It looks as if it was watercolor painted on. Surprisingly, it's got a beautiful marbling, and as the leaf hardens and ages, that light green becomes cream. I wasn't able to find too much about this specific plant's origins. To be honest with you, all I know is that the original one comes from Colombia. I am assuming that it's a genetic mutation that people ended up chopping and propping in order to get what we now see as the variegated version. This first made headlines on YouTube when popular YouTuber Kaylee Allen from the UK said that she won an auction, paid about, I believe, 1,400 pounds for this specimen at one of the aeroid shows. And she currently is selling propagations from her own personal collection for between 12 to 1,800 pounds, depending on the variegation. Meanwhile, on MonsteraX, I saw an auction for a 3-leafed specimen for about 2,300 US dollars. But then a couple of months ago on a local Facebook group, I saw a 1-leaf cutting, not established, for about $400. Plant care for this, very similar to the original Philodendron Gloriosum. That means having extremely well-draining soil, watering it once the soil is fully dry, giving it humidity between 60 to 80%, giving it bright indirect sunlight. The more humidity and filtered sunlight you give it, the more likely you're going to get better variegation. Quiet luxury plant number 3, a variegated Monstera Burl Marx flame. And this one has the same leaf shape. The leaf blades have this skeletal rib cage looking appearance, but the difference is the coloration. The coloration for the variegated form, instead of it being a solid deep green, it's got splashes of yellow, gold, aurea colors. Not much is known about the origin, history of this specific species. Is it even real? The jury's still out. I was perusing on a Reddit thread a couple weeks ago where someone said they saw the variegated version on this person's Instagram, bs.variegated stories. And another person was like, well, I actually saw it on Facebook from this guy from Brazil who has tons and tons of tissue culture that randomly found it in his collection. If you do indeed know the real story behind this plant, I'd love to know. Let me know down below. On MonsteraX a couple months ago, there was a auction for a 3-leafed established variegated Monstera Burl Marx flame. That sold for about 18,000 US dollars. I'm just gonna pause there for you to just like absorb that. $18,000. Okay, that could go toward many, many things in my life. And mind you, this wasn't even a fully mature plant. This was pretty juvenile. So I wouldn't even want to know how much a mature plant would be, or even if that exists currently. Now, if you do indeed have this in your collection, you don't even need my advice on how to take care of this one, to be honest. But for ish and giggles, we are going to give it extremely well-draining soil. It's got to have an aeroid mix, super, super chunky, orchid bark, perlite, etc. You want to water it when the top 1/3 to 1/2 is completely dry. You want to give it humidity between 60 and 85%, and then bright indirect sunlight. Quiet luxury plant number 4, a Monstera white monster kunzo. We are talking about the large form Monstera Deliciosa today. And this has similar beautiful white leaves and slight and very faint green veining, just enough to allow the plant to survive. And what this plant is known for is it'll often revert on you. You'll get like an all green leaf. And so what you do is essentially cut it so that it can push out. You can shock it into giving you an all white new leaf. The origin or history of this plant is quite fascinating. It comes from the collection of world-renowned rare plant collector and grower Kunzo Nishihara-san. I believe that's how you pronounce it. You can correct me down below, but it comes from his personal collection. He acquired this plant in the 90s from another grower from Japan, Mr. Ito. Now, Mr. Ito actually acquired this plant 70, 80 years before that, which is fascinating. And he ended up getting sick and spent months in the hospital. And when he came back to his greenhouse, a lot of his plants had perished. But as he was about to cut this Monstera that he had, he saw that it had this all white variegation, and the rest is history. Now, the pricing for this, it heavily reflects how exclusive it is. If you want to personally get a specimen from Kunzo's collection, you got to be prepared to pay top dollar. In 2021, Kunzo sold a plant from his collection for about 13,000 US dollars. That's pretty expensive. Pretty expensive, everyone. There are some plant scams going around, so if you truly want a Kunzo version of this plant, make sure that you ask whatever nursery grower for proper documentation certification, because there are a lot of folks that are pretending that they have Kunza white monsters, but they're in fact tissue culture mint monsteras. Now, these babies grow real slow, and that probably has to do because of the lack of green chlorophyll in the leaves, but make sure you have extremely well-draining aeroid soil, very, very chunky. You want to water it once the soil is completely dry. You want to give it high humidity, above 65%. Even higher, even better. And then of course, give it bright indirect sunlight. You want to be careful with giving it direct sunlight because it will burn the white leaves. Quiet luxury plant number 5, a Monstera devil monster. This plant has similar qualities as the previous Kunza white monster I just talked about, but the difference is that this one has even more green veining to keep it alive. And as you can tell from this beautiful image, it is absolutely breathtaking. And even the fenestrations, lusting after it forever and ever because I will never be able to afford this plant. This plant first popped up last February because of the Bangkok International Aeroid Show, and it sold for a whopping $39,000. And it was sold to the person who owns the account bs.variegated on Instagram, and my mind is just blown. How you can, I don't know how you can spend that money on a plant, but more power to you. It's beautiful. Honestly, I don't even know where you could source this because it seems like you need to be very well connected as well as have a lot of money. So if you have those things, great. I do not. I'm just a plant lover and observer. Let me know if you end up getting one. But I'm assuming the plant care is pretty similar to the previous plant I talked about, where you have to give it well-draining soil, water it once the soil is fully dry, give it high humidity above 60%, if not higher, and then of course bright indirect sunlight. There you have it. Those are 5 quiet luxury variegated plants. Were there any that I covered that you didn't know about? Were there ones that I didn't cover that you think I should have? Let me know down below. If you liked today's video, hit that like button. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified every single time I post, ring that bell. With that, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for spending it with me, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Until then, bye!